My name's Amanda Pasek. I am Associate Director for Digital Marketing here at Selby Gardens. And we have John McCarthy, Vice President for Regional History, presenting the treasures of the historic Spanish Point campus today. If you have any questions, you can feel free to put them in the chat and we'll address them at various points throughout the presentation.
Thanks so much, Amanda. And thanks to everyone joining us today. And a special thank you to Jennifer Romanecki, our President and CEO of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, for inviting me to present another series of historical briefings. And, last year we had a focus on our 50th anniversary of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. So all of our historical briefings were focused mostly on the downtown Sarasota campus. And we covered everything from what brought the Selbys here to Sarasota in the first place and how they loved the bayfront and boating and enjoying the great outdoors, to a program with Angel Lara, our VP for Botanical Horticulture, where we took a tour of the glass houses, and Bruce Holst, who went over all of the expeditions that have built the collections over the years. And then we had one called Treasures of the Downtown Campus, where we focused on the Selby House and the Payne Mansion, two prominent historic structures here in Sarasota. And then to cap it off, we did a history of Marie Selby Botanical Gardens covering all of the 50 years. And so this year we thought we'd turn our attention south to our historic Spanish Point campus and do a whole series called Treasures of the Historic Spanish Point Campus. And we're going to start today with a program about the Guptill House. And I'd like to do another shout out to a couple of volunteers I work with at the historic Spanish Point campus, Peg Kapustiak and Marlene O'Neill, who always provide information and images for me to add to make these programs more interesting. Today's program has two components. As we spend the spring looking at all the treasures of the downtown campus, we're going to spend today looking at the Guptill House and the Guptill Boathouse, two things that are kind of connected together. And as Amanda said, if you do have questions, please put them in the chat. We're going to stop at some point during the program and take a few questions, and then we'll have an opportunity for questions at the end as well. So let's get started with the Guptill House. Now, to a lot of people, this is just another house, just another house. It seems to sit up on a hill, and it's quite attractive. But the more you learn about it, the more fascinating it becomes. And so I think that there are a number of aspects of the Guptill House that make it special, and I want to share those with you today. One of the most important things that I see is how the house can inform in terms of living sustainably in Florida. The house is on the coast, elevated on a high Indian mound, wonderful breezes, huge windows, airflow underneath the house, no interior walls in the main living space, so the breeze can just blow right on through the house like natural air conditioning. It kind of is in a hurricane-resistant location while it's right on the coastline, less than a mile really from the Gulf of Mexico, across a little piece of Siesta Key, separating it from the Gulf, and then Little Sarasota Bay. But it is perched way up on top of the archaic shell ring or Indian mound, and it's 18 feet above sea level there. So that makes it kind of hurricane resistant. And by the way, we did quite well in our last summer with the Guptill House as well, kind of proving that that location was a good choice. Has exceptionally fine craftsmanship, which we'll see in some of the photographs that I'll share. And frankly, the one that you're looking at right now showing the staircase. It is a rare and fine example of Queen Anne architecture in the Sarasota area. Queen Anne is a form of Victorian architecture. There are not a lot of buildings ever built in Sarasota with these very steep pitched roofs and the little trim pieces, and fewer have survived as well as this one has. And what's also amazing is that this was completely restored in the early 1980s by volunteers. Volunteers are so essential, of course, to the operation of Selby Gardens, and were also important in saving the Guptill House, and we'll talk more about that later. The Guptill House is on the National Register of Historic Places by virtue of it being a contributing structure on the entire campus. And it's also locally designated historic. We're going to talk about all that stuff. But the bottom line is that this is a house that is open to members, visitors, guests, school groups, 364 days a year, and has a lot that it can educate us about life in Florida. I kind of want to start. A lot of people talk about this as Frank Guptill's house. And Frank certainly had a hand in building it. But I don't want to forget that Frank was married to a woman named Lizzie Webb. And it was as much her house as his, and perhaps more so, in that the land was donated to her by her father when she married Frank Guptill. So the land was kind of hers, and then we'll hear more of that story. But I don't want to forget Lizzie in it because a lot of people say, "Oh, that's the Frank Guptill house." Well, it's the Guptill house. And just a little bit about Lizzie, wonderful photograph of her here. She was born in Utica, New York, in May of 1855. She arrived with her family in Florida in 1867 and really became amongst the true early pioneers of Sarasota when there were very few people living in this area. And she married Frank Guptill on June 16th of 1879. These are her parents, John Green Webb and Elizabeth Graves Webb. So she shared a first name with her mom and hence took on the nickname Lizzie. Her mom was known as Eliza. And they came to Florida because Eliza had asthma, and the doctors said, "Go south and you'll feel better." And she did. She claimed she never had another asthma attack after coming to Florida. John Green Webb was a bit of a chemist, pharmacist, gentleman farmer, and well prepared to come and stake a claim of the homestead land in Florida back in the 1860s. They arrived at what we now call the historic Spanish Point campus. Has had various names over the years. This is an old photograph labeled Webb's Point, taken from the top of White Cottage, looking out at the original homestead house, Casey Key and Siesta Key in the background, surrounded by Little Sarasota Bay. Quite the pioneer outpost. Very early on in the homestead settlement, they attracted boarders and guests who came from Philadelphia and New York and many, many places to come to Florida and relax, go fishing, go hunting, and actually on scientific expeditions as well. This is one photograph taken of some of the visiting guests. They are actually on the north end of Casey Key. You see the south end of Siesta Key in the background. And they are enjoying a little picnic along what used to be called Little Sarasota Pass. This would be very close to where the Midnight Pass recently reopened in the hurricanes. Boats were essential to life along the coast. Bringing in those boarders to the Webb's Winter Resort required a boat, and shipping out all the agricultural products required large vessels as well. You have citrus and vegetables and fish and pigs and other things that you're selling in Key West and Cedar Key, and you need a reliable way to get them there. This is the first large schooner that the Webbs purchased so that they could haul their products to market, and this was the Ruby. And the Ruby was later sold to the Whitaker family when the Webbs had a larger boat, which was built by Frank Guptill. So now we come to Frank, whose real name was Uriah, but everyone called him Frank, and he called himself Frank, and so that's how we refer to him today. He was born in Cutler, Maine in the 1840s. At the age of 11, he stowed away on his half-brother's brig, and he ended up spending 10 years sailing the seas and went around Cape Horn, which was a ferocious ocean passage, sailed in almost all the oceans, went to Africa, Madagascar. And while he started out as a cabin boy, he kind of graduated along the way, and ultimately he was counting the barrels of whale oil and other commodities that would be brought aboard the ship or hauled off the ship onto smaller boats to go off to market. And so he had greater responsibility over the years. Growing up in the area that he grew up in Maine, he witnessed boat building all around him, and everything was about ships and sailing. But he got yellow fever in Madagascar and traveled back to the U.S., ended up in Jacksonville, and was hired by an insurance company to help get a stuck schooner off of the bar at Longboat Inlet, which he had no idea where that was. And this is where the Webb family and the Guptill connection comes in, is that the Webbs either met him at Manatee River or Cedar Key. There are various reports from the family as to which it was. But in any case, it was either 1873 or 1875 when he met the Webbs. He needed help in locating this wrecked ship off a longboat, and they needed help building a bigger schooner. And they invited him to come down to their place after helping him find that schooner out on longboat. He fell in love with their youngest daughter, Jenny. They were married, and very soon after, she had an accident at the house, fell down the stairs, and passed away. And so everyone on the homestead was heartbroken. Jenny was the first person interred in the Pioneer Cemetery. And the little trail that leads from the homestead to the cemetery is called Love's Lane, not because of the chapel and weddings, but long before that, because their love had been buried there in the cemetery on the Indian Mound. So Frank ended up marrying Jenny's sister, Lizzie, in 1879. And the following year, the father deeded land to Lizzie at what they called Deer Point, which is just a little projection out from the bay, not as prominent as that Spanish Point, if you will, but that's what they called it, Deer Point, because they would often see deer there when they first arrived on the property. We'll take a look at that in a minute. That bayfront site was quite unique. Not only did it include an ancient, several thousand-year-old shell mound, but it had a freshwater spring, so provided them excellent fresh water just out their back door. For years, they lived on a scow schooner, the Florence, that Frank had built when he first came to the area. And a lot of people have given me the impression over the years that Frank was a skilled boat builder when he came here. But the more I read, the more I found that that was not the case, that basically he came here with an axe, a pocket knife, and a saw, and with those things kind of taught himself how to build boats and how to build homes. And in the census, he appears as a carpenter of homes and boats. And so he kind of taught himself. And the first schooner, the Florence, they didn't know what was going to happen. And the family recalled that they were very pleased with the outcome. And that gave them the confidence to build the Vision, which was a much larger schooner for the Webb family to haul their product to market. They built a kitchen up on the mound, probably as early as 1881 or 1882. They lived on the Florence in the bay. Frank was very comfortable living on the water. And of course, this was probably mostly true in the winter time when the resort was filled with guests. And off season, there would have been plenty of accommodation inside. But in any case, they built a small kitchen in the 1880s, and then in 1901 had the resources to build a much larger house, which is the subject of our program today. So to see the location of this, I've pulled out some archaeological diagrams because here it shows, the point of shell mound extending out into the bay, and then the circular archaic shell ring that's approximately 4,000 to 5,000 years old. And then here you can see where the green arrow points is the Guptill House located on the highest part of the mound, 18 feet above sea level. The floor level of the house is actually a couple of feet higher than that. These are some of the artifacts that came out of the mound in the 1950s and early 1960s when Gordon Palmer, the grandson of Bertha Palmer, had engaged the Florida Museum at the University of Florida in Gainesville to come and take a look at these amazing historic sites with all these Indian mounds. And this is going to be the subject of our March program. So we're not going to talk too much about it today, but just know that this is an exceptionally historic site and a great place to build a home. And this is a view from the bottom of the mound. And, for people that come from other places, probably not unusual to see a hill, but for Floridians, there aren't natural hills like this in Florida along the coast. And any place you have a rise in landscape like this, it is because it's an ancient shell mound. This is Frank Guptill's boatyard. And this was at the base of the mound, right where the reconstructed boatyard is today. And you can see this one was just made out of logs that he could find, branches, and palmetto thatch. And so this served well. Now, the reason why I've inserted this photograph here is to show you that we believe this is the Florence. This is the scow schooner that Frank first built and that he and Lizzie lived on in the bay for many, many years. And a scow schooner is just a very blunt-ended, very wide schooner. It could haul a lot of produce and other products. And so this was a money-making boat for Frank. But he had it set up with a cabin top And the cabin top in this particular photograph has been removed and is sitting over here on the left. And so this is essentially where Frank and Lizzie lived. And this photograph was taken just as the house was being completed. And it seems to me that because they were moving off of the boat into the house, that Frank had removed the cabin top so that he could open the boat up for more shipping. And we'll never know, but that's what I think we're seeing here. Now, this is a little artistic rendering that was drawn by Lizzie's sister Anna of Anna's kitchen. And what's amazing to me about this is that this might have also provided some of the inspiration for Lizzie to build the kitchen up on the mound too. And if you look on the right-hand side, you see the cast iron wood burning stove. I like to tell people when they come to the Guptill House, it's not like you turn this on and off. You stoked it in the morning, you cooked breakfast, you made your coffee, you stoked it for supper, you stoked it for dinner. It just kept going all the time and it warmed the place. And anyway, then as you move to the left, you see a vanity with a little mirror on it and a lamp on it, and looks like some perfume bottles and a barrel for water. And it looks like it's covered with maybe cheesecloth. Then you see a clock. And then over here on the far left, you see a little corner cupboard, a little cabinet with some glassware and some china and some other little items like that. And then you see the table with the pie on it. And so while this is not the Guptill kitchen, I believe this was kind of the inspiration for the Guptill kitchen. And I think that while they were still living on the boat and kind of had the kitchen to come up to and sleep on cold nights or stormy nights, and obviously to prep their food, that their kitchen was probably set up very similar to this, because Lizzie would have wanted that vanity and she would have wanted that little shelves for her precious items. And so I think this is just a wonderful little piece of art. Now, this is the oldest photograph that we have of the Guptill House, and it's actually still under construction. This is 1901. You can see it perched way up on top of that shell mound. You can see some oak trees there. And you can see that the roof is not yet completed. There's no chimney yet. There are some people there kind of checking it out, checking on the progress. You see it's kind of a prominent building here on the landscape, very steep pitched roofs, very typical of the Queen Anne architecture, some nice little details, and of course, veranda across the whole front side. Here's a little article from May of 1901 out of the Manatee River Journal. And it talks about Mr. Shirley coming down to Osprey to build the brick chimney for the Guptill residents. And so even people up on the Manatee River were interested in what was going on down in Osprey. And we have these wonderful photographs that the Webb family has donated. And this shows the interior of the Guptill House. And what one of the real sustainable features here are these massive double hung windows. Not only could they be opened both from the bottom and the top so you could get air circulating through, but in the corner, they come together in the corner. So if you could imagine the sea breeze is kicking in from the bay and you're opening these windows on this corner and you're just getting a tremendous cross ventilation. And then, as I said at the beginning, there are no interior walls in this first floor of the house to block that breeze. So the breeze is coming in the front porch, cooling down in the porch, coming through those windows, blowing through the house and out the back porch. You'll see that Lizzie loved her botany. She has lots of houseplants there in the sunlight there, because this is the southwest corner of the house. And you see a desk set up with an oil burning lamp. You see a number of framed items on the walls, and you see wicker furniture and cane furniture, and all of this. These photographs were taken sometime between 1901 and 1911. Here's another one, just shifting a little bit to the left. Again, the tremendously large double hung windows. I tell people, I can show them 100 houses in Sarasota downtown with double hung windows, but I can't show them another one with windows as wide as these. These were uncharacteristically large windows at the time. You see on the left-hand windowsill a Sansevieria plant, which is commonly found on shell mounds throughout Florida. And here they have it in their home. And you see another oil lamp, very similar to the one we saw on the other table on this little desk with several books. And you also see the beautiful staircase, which we're going to have a chance to see later on in color. And then the final of this set of three photographs shows the wonderful fireplace and Lizzie's piano. And the piano was made in New York, probably came down by railroad into Sarasota sometime after 1902 and set up here in the Guptill House. And this was kind of the center of entertainment. It was like the Van Wezel of Sarasota back in the day. This is where Lizzie would play the piano, Frank would play his violin, all the community would come and enjoy holidays and special occasions. And the young people were particularly attracted to Frank and Lizzie. And there's numerous items that relate to parties being thrown by the young people of Osprey here at the house. There's stories of people sailing up the bay and hearing music coming from the house and coming up and joining the party. So this house was a real special place at a time when there really weren't that many houses along the bay. One of the other things that you can see in these old photographs is the pine paneling on the walls, which, like a good boat builder, Frank separated out the dark panels from the light panels and then alternated them as he went around the room, so there weren't big dark areas and then light areas and dark areas, but it kind of alternates as it goes around. And the family recalls that when they have a fire going in the fireplace, the flames would kind of flicker off these and kind of bring that paneling to life, if you will. So this is another special photograph on the front porch. And again, you notice mostly young people, a big gathering of folks enjoying the breeze there along the bay. And I'll point out that the red cedar tree that you see in the background of this photograph is still there today. It's about 3 or 4 times as large as it appears back in this photograph. But it's one of the many historic trees that we have on the campus that we can see in old photographs. And so the Guptills were very much admired and loved by everybody in the community. They also took in boarders. I mean, they didn't need a house this big. They had no children. But these are some of the boarders that probably stayed at the house. And Frank and Lizzie could move back into the kitchen if they needed to rent out more rooms. The main bedroom actually has a private exit to the back porch. And so that might have been attractive to certain guests. They'd pay a little bit more and they'd have their own little private entry. And standing, we have Frank on the left in the boat and Lizzie next to him. Frank almost always wore white pants, so you can always pick him out of the photographs. And this is just a little sailboat they had again taken out to the north end of Casey Key, south end of Siesta Key in the background there along Little Sarasota Pass, which was a 3-mile long pass that connected Osprey up to Point of Rocks and provided the access out to the Gulf of Mexico. This today would be Turtle Beach Lagoon and Heron Lagoon, for those of you familiar with Siesta Key. And so this was a pass that existed for a long time prior to the opening of Midnight Pass with the hurricane in 1921. But people look at these old photographs and say, oh, they can't believe these people are all dressed up to go to the beach. Well, this was Webb's winter resort. This was not the summertime. They really weren't going to the beach to go swimming. They were going to the beach to picnic and to fish and to collect beautiful shells and just to enjoy the fresh air. You know, what brought the Webb family down in the first place was the healthy environment. So a lot of people came for that reason. And here we have that very same day, Lizzie on the left, Frank in the middle, and he's serving up a little coffee there. And I'm not sure, but it looks to me like down in that lower left-hand corner, they got a jar of orange marmalade that her dad had made. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes. But could you imagine taking a little sailboat out to the Keys? There's nothing there except pure nature, and the breeze is blowing in, and the beautiful shells, and all sorts of wonderful things to discover. So this is a photograph from the top of White Cottage. There used to be a little widow's walk up there. You could climb all the way up on top and look all around, look out to the Gulf of Mexico, look out to the pass. And here the green arrow on the right points to the Guptill House, and the green arrow on the left points to the Guptill dock, where he had a little warehouse out on the dock. And in the foreground, you can see the footbridge that was built by Mr. Cox, who also had a house on the property, to connect out to the point where he had other friends. And that's where our footbridge is today. This particular photograph was taken about 1910, right after a large hurricane had come through the area. And I can see damage to the footbridge here probably from that storm event. But if you look, you'll see there's another dock beyond the Guptill dock. This was associated with the property that was the next property north. And there were several other docks and other structures along the southern shore south of the homestead as well. Now, moving kind of along in time, it was kind of a sad day in Sarasota in 1912 when Frank Guptill passed away. And this is a very long obituary, one of the longest obituaries I've ever seen published in the Sarasota Times newspaper. And it talks about how sad day it is for him to pass away. It talks about him growing up in Maine and stowing away on his half-brother schooner and getting what they called African fever, which we've researched to find was yellow fever, and then coming down. But I wanted to say the last one here, Captain Guptill built him a very handsome house on the mound and recently sold to Miss Potter Palmer. And then he built another bungalow out on Siesta Key. And it references that his house was often the gathering place for the young folks for parties. Mr. and Mrs. Guptill were very popular with the young people, and Captain Frank will be sadly missed. So I thought I wanted to include that. And just to kind of wrap things up a little bit, I mean, Lizzie had arrived in 1867. Frank had arrived certainly by 1875, married in 1880. They built the kitchen, lived there for 20 years or so before the house was built. Lizzie sold out to Bertha Palmer in 1911 as she was trying to kind of reestablish the original homestead and buy back all the parcels that John Webb had sold so that she could put it all together to create her Florida estate. And when Lizzie and Frank left and moved out to Little Sarasota Key, what we call Siesta Key today, she'd been on the property for 44 years, which I think is amazing. So Bertha Palmer changes the name to the Hill Cottage because this was on the hill. And she spruced it up a little bit, made some changes, which we'll see later. But she also did landscaping because she was obsessed with the gardening and creating this as a part of her garden estate. So you see, she took bricks, turned them in an angle, and used them to edge the shell pathways that were paved with crushed oyster shell. Then she planted these aloes and many other plants here. Here's another image where a couple of the things that she planted have grown up larger. Those look like possibly gumbo limbo trees that might have been taken from cuttings over on the point. This is not Bertha Palmer in this photograph, by the way. It's probably one of her guests because she used the Guptill House, or what she called Hill Cottage, as a guest house for visiting friends. This is a photograph that I showed in one of the programs I did a couple of years ago called The Gardens of the Sarasota Region. And this is the garden that was created on the downslope of the mound going down toward the boatyard. And the oak tree on the left is the one that fell over in the 1921 hurricane and is still there today. But you see these aloe plants, and it looks like some nice flowering plants there. And again, the little bricks turned up on edge there. And then you see that other big boathouse in the background that was over closer to where Bertha Palmer's main house was. And then as we move up in time, this is 1951. Gordon Palmer's been on the property for a couple of years now, kind of rescuing it from it being abandoned since the 1930s. And you can see that Guptill House is looking a little worse for wear, but I found this photograph to be fascinating. This one's also from that same era of the big pathway leading right up to the Guptill House. And all the volunteers and anyone who's been there will kind of recognize this scene as you come through the woods and you come up to the top of the mound with the Guptill House on the right, then you come around the corner and the bay just opens up in front of you. So I think this was a wonderful shot. And then this is a photograph of the Guptill House in 1973. And you see that the gutters are coming apart, and there's some coverings over the windows that may have broken. And here you see it in subsequent years. The only thing that's really changing is things are falling apart and the no trespassing sign has gotten larger. Now it's like a 4x8 sheet of plywood tacked up on the front of the porch. And this is the way the Guptill House looked the first time I saw it in November of 1979. I was on the property with Dottie Davis, who was the county historian. And she was photographing the building and concerned about its future. This was 1979. The next year it would be donated by the Palmer family. But again, you can see that the house was in very poor condition in 1980 when it was donated by the Palmer family for use as a historical and natural science center. And so there was a lot of work to be done. The original master plan for the site called for the restoration of what they called the Hill Cottage on this particular plan, and also the Guptill Boathouse or boat shed. And so this is what happened. And this is actually April of 1982, one of the first times that the general public was welcomed into the what we now call the historic Spanish Point campus. And you see people are just looking at this old house, and it probably doesn't have a lot of meaning to any of them at this point in time. But then this gentleman was secured, Walter Maycomer, here on the left. Walter Maycomer was the artist, the architect in residence at Mount Vernon, and he had spent like 20 years restoring colonial Williamsburg. So he was like one of the nation's greatest historic preservation architects and with a lot of practical experience. And so he was secured to come down and supervise volunteers in the restoration of the Guptill House. And the gentleman to the left, Harry McEwen, he was hired to design the homes that were being built in Oaks Bayside, which was the remainder of the Bertha Palmer estate. And if you were an early person buying into that, more than likely your home was designed by Harry McEwen. And this was a poster that was created in 1984, kind of celebrating the completion of the restoration of the Guptill House and honoring these two gentlemen for 163 years of devotion to architecture. Both of them had interest in historic architecture and used that interest in their work. But this is a nice little artifact to have from 1984. And so let's take a look at what they were up against. This is the back porch of the Guptill House, and this is where Bertha Palmer had enclosed the porches on the lower level in the back, as well as the upper second story, to create indoor bathrooms. So prior to that, the Guptills had an outhouse, but Bertha Palmer needed indoor plumbing. And so this is basically removing everything that she added. And in fact, most of the restoration was just that, undoing what she had done. And for all of our viewers, and particularly our volunteers, this gives you an excellent look at the upstairs bathroom where the little porch is completely enclosed. And then the downstairs porch where not only was the existing Guptill porch enclosed, but an addition was built to it. And then this is the kitchen off to the left. So these were where the Bertha Palmer restrooms were located, not underneath the steps, as someone tried to ask me about the other day. And then this is work in progress. They kind of perched up the roof to keep the original roof, took out the rotten wood on the porch, and started to rebuild that. They've removed the big addition that Bertha had here. And you can see the kitchen in pretty poor shape where the roofs connected. They had to remove all that, kind of start over with that. But all this work was done by volunteers. Here you start to see it coming back together. And you see this framework for this big extension that Bertha created here. And then she had these concrete steps going up to it. So a lot of changes from the way it is today. And then this photograph just of the kitchen I liked because it kind of reminds me of what the place looked like when there was just a kitchen for the probably approximately 20 years when all there was a little kitchen on the top of the mound. But it's got the beautiful fish scale shingles on the front and nice detailing, which probably was added in 1901 when they did the main house, because that also is clad, all the gable ends are clad with the fish scale shingles. And so that was probably when this was really fancied up. So if we go inside, we can really see the restoration work that had to occur because Bertha Palmer had put wallboard up over all the beaded pine, and then she had painted all the trim with several coats of white oil-based paint. And underneath this white oil-based paint is beautiful, beautiful pine. And so the good news was that it was easy to take the wall boarding off of the walls, but could you imagine the paint on top of that staircase? And for those of you familiar with the staircase, of course, I'm going to show you some nice photographs here in a couple of minutes. This was like hard to believe that this occurred, but it was the style of the day. You know, get away from the dark paneled rooms and brighten things up. You're in Florida. You want kind of a cottage effect, a beachy effect. So that's what she did. You'll also notice the beautiful pine underneath the stairs. And that was probably covered up with wallboard as well, or possibly she made a little closet underneath there. But for whatever reason, that was not painted, which I'm sure the people doing the restoration were thankful for because they actually had to sand and scrape and use dental tools to remove all the paint from the staircases and the fireplace mantles. So this is nearing completion of the restoration in '84. Everything's painted up nice. and all the windows are working, and the porches have been rebuilt, and the interior has been restored, and now people can enjoy the house. There was a whole program of interpretation that was set up in terms of how to furnish the house. Total coincidence, the Historical Society of Sarasota County was closing down a historical museum that they had in the Luke Wood House, one of the oldest houses in Sarasota. And so Spanish Point kind of became the recipients of the furniture that they were getting rid of. And so there are a number of period furnishings and accessories in the home that were all donated by the Historical Society of Sarasota or the Junior League of Sarasota, because it was the Junior League who had kind of created this whole effort to restore the site and open it up to the public. Now, in 1999, the county approached us and asked how we felt about local designation for the Guptill House. It was already on the National Register by virtue of it being on the property. The entire site is on the National Register of Historic Places, both for its archaeological resources as well as its historic resources. But the County History Center felt that the Guptill House was one of the most important structures in Sarasota County. And in a very unusual move, they partnered with us and actually drafted the nomination themselves. Typically, this is up to a property owner to draft a nomination and submit it for their review. Instead, it was so important to them that Jorge Dantas Spector took it on his own and did all the research, working with us, and put together a proposal that went in front of the Board of County Commissioners back in 2019. And when you read the nomination report, it really makes you smile, because the Guptill House was described as of great historical significance for our area and met all 7 of the attributes of integrity, as they're called, defined in the county's historic preservation program, i.e. its preservation ordinances. That includes integrity of location, quality of design, is it in its original setting? And indeed it is. The materials that are used, the workmanship, the feeling that it has, and the association with historic important people. In this case, the Webb family, Guptill, Bertha Palmer, Gordon Palmer, tremendous amount of association. And so this kind of hits a home run, if you will, and knocks it out of the ballpark, hitting all 7 attributes that the county looks for in whether something is designated locally historic. And one of the great things about it in my mind was that Jorge was open-minded enough to also include the boatyard and the boat launch, where boats had been launched, since the 1870s. And so the local designation recognizes all of these features as important parts of the history. And of course, you can't disconnect the house from the boatyard and the bay itself, because they're integrally related. Here we are today. Again, beautiful example of Queen Anne architecture, the little Victorian details like the fish scale shingles, the extra mullions and muttons on the windows, the little extra trim on the supports for the upstairs porch roof, the exposed rafter tails with no fascia board on the front porch. These are all aspects of the Queen Anne Victorian style. And of course, you see the original kitchen, much older than the house, off to the right. Here's the little kitchen, and it's just a wonderful little hut to live in. If that's all you have in Florida back, in the 1880s and 1890s, you're really not doing too bad. Inside, we've got some furnishings like an old cast iron stove, just like the one we saw in Anna's sketch of her kitchen, positioned exactly where Anna's was positioned in that sketch as well. And then a pie safe to keep your baked goods healthy. And we have an ice box in there as well. But more importantly, we have the original Webb copper kettle that John Webb used to process down his sugar cane into crystalline sugar. Most people in Florida that grew sugar cane, they created sugar cane and molasses. Those were the 2 products. But he wanted to take it one notch up. And so in order to do that, he needed another vessel, because you do the primary cooking in a big cast iron vessel, but he needed another one. He needed another pot to make crystalline sugar. And the family says this is the one that he made it in. Well, this is also the perfect vessel to make his orange marmalade. And John Webb was famous for his orange marmalade. And so we have kind of reproduced his orange marmalade as best we can, and we market it. We sell it as Packin' House brand orange marmalade. So it's tied to the history. We've got the kettle that the old orange marmalade was made in. And that is just amazing, the way the family donated items back to the land once the Guptill House started to be restored. So let's go ahead and take a little tour of the house real quick. Let's walk through a 124-year-old front door, which is kind of amazing, original front door. And this house is very warm and inviting. You come right into the middle of the house and you're exposed to this huge great room. Again, no interior walls here to block that breeze. You've got the staircase welcoming you up. You've got the little dining room, multi-purpose table on the right. You've got the fireplace and the piano on the left. You've got beautiful pine floors, beautiful pine paneling on the walls and the ceiling. You are surrounded by native wood. This is that corner with all those nice windows that you can open up and let the breeze come through. And you see a map of Florida up there, and you see the oil lamp, very similar to the one we saw in the old photographs. And there's actually a little model of the magic boat over there. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you look up at the ceiling the next time you visit, you can see the tack holes from where Bertha Palmer put the wall board up on the ceiling to cover up all the pine and make it all white. And so that was an easy removal, and the holes are just part of the history. But now we have, of course, that beautiful pine ceiling again, and the very unusual curly pine wood that Frank selected for use in the staircase and the fireplace mantels. And I know a lot of people that know wood, and no one's ever seen wood like this before. This was probably a gnarly pine tree that grew down by the bayfront and been twisted over the years, and it was running through the sawmill, and it produced this wonderful grainy wood, and Frank selected that for all the features in the house. Taking a closer look at that, it is just gorgeous. This was all painted white. This is what was cleaned with dental tools. And then you can also see here the little wave pattern, which is not uncommon for a staircase in this era. But, you know, Frank was a seaman and a sailor and a shipbuilder. And so he's got the little wave pattern there on the staircase. Look at the excellent integrity of this wood. It's not damaged at all. It's like brand new. I can't emphasize enough how excited I get about this wood because it's one of the most unique things about the house. And it really ties into the botanical history of the place, you know, and how important these native woods were. The fireplace mantle itself is all the curly pine. Now, all the other trim wood would have been bought at a lumber yard in Sarasota or Manatee or Tampa. It was the windows, the doors. Those weren't items that Frank made. He acquired those, but then built everything else and obviously built the staircase and the fireplace mantels. We have Lizzie's original piano that you saw in the old photographs. It was donated back by the family, and so it's still there today. And we have Frank's violin, which he called a fiddle. But we've learned this is bridged as a violin. It's a very fancy violin, and the family donated this once the Guptill House was restored. So we have kind of the center of entertainment back again, the piano, the fiddle, and stories to tell about celebrations and parties and singing together and everything else. And then in the primary bedroom, which is kind of the northern third of the ground floor, we have another original item, which was the original bed that Frank had made for he and Lizzie when they were married. It's made out of red cedar. And an interview with a family member back in the 1970s claimed that he had gone over to Casey Key, chopped down the cedar tree, drug it across the bay, floated across the bay, and then with an axe, a saw, and a pocket knife made this bed and then started building boats. So it is gorgeous red cedar wood. It was donated to us in 2019. And it had gone from here to Siesta Key to downtown Sarasota. And then it had been thrown out into a junk pile on the street after Lizzie had died. And a neighbor picked it up and kept it along with some paperwork on the Guptills and the Webbs, and then donated it when they were moving into a condo. It was a random call one morning, and I'll never forget it. The woman calls up and says, "I have Lizzie Guptill's bed," and her husband is in the background saying, "Just take it to Goodwill and be done with it." And I told Caitlin Whitaker, who was working with us at Spanish Point, then I said, "If this bed is curly pine, I'm going to jump for joy. If it's oak, I'm not going to take it." And it turns out to be red cedar. And then we found in the interview a description of it confirming that this was the bed here at the Guptill House. So, and again, just kind of looking around the bedroom, another beautiful fireplace and just a gorgeous interior. We'll go upstairs for a minute. And two bedrooms upstairs. Again, these were designed to rent out as part of the Webb's Winter Resort for income for the Guptills. And so you've got your bed, you've got your washstand, your chamber pot, your cabinets, a little writing desk. and just kind of the way it was back in the day. And then this is the northern room, and we've got some ship models there and the types of things that we would expect would have been there back in the day. So there's a lot of education that takes place here. This is a view from the upstairs porch. And I just think it's amazing, these trees that have been shaped by the weather, and the boatyard down there on the far left, and just the slope down the mound and the beautiful bay. And there's a little boat out there in the bay, just like in the old days when Frank was there. And just the other day when I was taking these photographs, there was a woman doing some plein air painting. And as she left, we asked if we could see what she had done, and she showed me this. And I asked if I could photograph it and put it in the program, because I think that her little art does such a perfect job of combining the Guptill House with the bayfront and the trees and everything, and just captured that connection in a real special way. And she did this in like no time at all. It was just a real quick sketch, but I thought it was just a great way to tie it all together. So with that, I think we'll pause, and Amanda will ask me some questions. If y'all have put questions in the chat, then we'll answer some questions before we move on to the final part of the program.
Yes. Let's see. How did the Guptill House handle this year's hurricanes?
Yeah, really minor damage. Interestingly enough, the only damage done to it was modern stuff. Like we had a tree fall down on the restroom roof and kind of collapsed the gutter a little bit and impacted the deck. But that was all kind of modern stuff. And then we lost the cap off the chimney top, and that was it. Other than that, the house fielded the hurricanes quite nicely. Again, it's 18 feet above sea level, set back a little bit behind the vegetation, and built solid as a rock.
Good. All right. How was the restoration funded?
Well, the restoration was funded through a variety of grants. One of the first ones came from the William G. and Marie Selby Foundation. That kind of got the project started back in the 1980s. And then other grants from the state of Florida were used in restoring other buildings on the property and recreating some of the buildings that we're going to talk about in future episodes of Treasures of the Historic Campus. And also donated funds and donated materials, and then volunteer effort. Again, I can't emphasize enough. Guptill House was restored by volunteers under the supervision of Walter Maycomer. There was no general contractor involved in those days. It was done by volunteers.
Right. How much did the Webbs charge for their guests?
Oh my gosh. That would have changed over the years. I remember one account, it was like $30 for a month, and then it was extra if you wanted wood to stoke your fire and that type of thing. They had a couple add-on options that you could do. And then that was room and board, back in those days. But if like they'd give you a barrel of crackers in your room or something, they'd charge you extra for that, and then they'd charge you extra for doing some laundry and things like that. But it would have changed over time. I mean, it's amazing. The first visitors really started coming within a year of their settlement there. And so by 1868, you had a few visitors, and then it really ramped up, and that continued all the way up through like 1910 and 11 when the property was sold to Bertha Palmer. So there would have been a tremendous change in value and cost during that period of time.
Okay. Can you show the photos of when the sleeping porches were bathrooms by Bertha?
Oh, well, I did show them, but I don't have any like historic photographs of that. But I showed, we could see that earlier in the photos that I showed. So yeah. And
Yep.
this video will be on YouTube, by the way. So if you want to see it again, just go to YouTube, Marie Selby Botanical Gardens, look for this particular video, and you can check it out again.
Yep. I was just about to say that. With all the wood in the house, has there been any problem with termites?
Just a little bit. This really ancient heart pine, as it's called, where it's the real center of these old trees, is fairly resistant to termites. But some of the wood that's used for the casement windows and the doors and things like that can be susceptible to. It has not been a big issue, and I think it's probably the primary reason why the house is still there was because that heart pine and termites don't get along. The soft pine is consumed readily by termites, but the rock hard stuff that you can't even put a nail in, they don't like it too much. And so I think the Guptill House has kind of survived periods of neglect back in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, and survived because of the materials themselves.
Right. Was Jenny pregnant when she died?
Yes, she was pregnant with Frank's child. She fell down the steps of the homestead. She had it was not a good situation. Frank was sailing back, I think, from Key West, and it was the first real tragedy for the Webb family, who had faced a lot of hardship, but had persevered until that had occurred, and that did change things for the family for sure. All right, we better move on, Amanda,
Yeah.
because we got some more slides.
Okay.
All right, we got to shift gears. We're going to shift gears to talk about the boatyard. And this is the Lizzie G. She's perched up on the mound next to the house. This was the first boat built in the modern boatyard, and we'll talk about how that happened. This is the oldest photograph I can find of Guptill's boat shed. This is kind of taken from the south, not an angle that we're used to seeing it from. So we're going to flip around to this angle. So this is the same structure. The other photograph was from the back side. This is from what we'll call the front side. And you saw this one before with the Florence in there. This structure evolved over the years. I've seen another photograph where it had mostly, it was more timber based, not round logs. And it had a sloping shed roof. And so that was an improved version of it. And then ultimately, I think it was probably taken out by the hurricane in 1910. And if it wasn't, it was taken out by Bertha Palmer, because she actually put in a seawall, created an automobile drive from her home, the Oaks, down in front of what she called the Hill Cottage, what we call the Guptill House, and did a turnaround right where the boatyard was. This is the Phantom. This is one of the schooners that Frank Guptill had worked on. And he did not build the original vessel, but when this vessel wrecked, he took it and lengthened it and widened it, cut it up into four pieces basically, and somehow put it all back together. And this was a famous boat, still along the coast, working in the 1930s. And here it's actually moored at the packing house dock. And you can see the packing house in the background. This is another shot of the Phantom at sail. So Frank was not averse to large sailing schooners. He just kept building larger and larger boats. This is a design of his called the Mermaid. This was from 1891. It was designed as a fast racing sailboat, and it was really designed to haul products to market. But if you look at the hull shape and the lines of the hull, this is remarkably similar to the Magic. And this particular vessel was actually sold to the Fogarty brothers, who were boat builders up on the Manatee River. Before it was completed, they hauled it up there and they did the rigging and sold it. And it was owned by various people over the years. At one time, it caught fire and the owner was on board and he scuttled it so it would sink and put the fire out. And then it was restored. But ultimately, in the 1920s, it was wrecked up in near Tarpon Springs in Old Tampa Bay. And the Works Progress Administration, Merchant Marine, studied it. And on this next page, this is the description of the Mermaid, and it talks about the keel being laid in 1891 by Frank Guptill's shipyard in Osprey. It talks about the wood. The keel was made out of pine. The knees were made out of red cypress. The rails were made out of pine. The frames were made out of cedar, probably right from the property here over on Casey Key. And then you see all the pine and cypress and everything else. And so this is definitely a local homegrown boat, kind of preserved in history by the WPA effort of the 1930s. And then Frank probably built all the boats that you see in this particular photograph. This is not the packing house dock. This is the Saunders grocery store, general store dock just south of the packing house. And here you see Magic at the dock. You see another power launch. You see some rowboat out there. You see a sailboat out there, and you see a barge. And Frank built a number of these little barges. That would be called a lighter. And you would use that to move things around the bay locally. So if you had to bring a whole lot of stuff, down to Venice or up to Sarasota, you would use that barge. Frank 1890s, he was the first person to install a gasoline engine in a former sailboat. And this is the Zephyr. And this was a large schooner up on the Manatee River, and Frank outfitted it with internal combustion engine. And this boat ultimately fell apart in the 1920s. Here's another view of it. And then here's a view of it during the Spanish-American War. This was referred to as the Bradenton Navy and guarded the mouth of the Manatee River. And you see everyone on board is armed. This is the Magic, similar story. Fast racing sailboat, probably similar to the Mermaid, was converted by Frank to be a motorboat, a powerboat with a one-cylinder gasoline engine. Here you see it at the Packing House dock with Mabel Webb at the helm. And also in this image, you see a rowing skiff of all things. You know, Sarasota has become famous recently for their rowing, and yet people were rowing here in Sarasota, in Osprey at least, way back in the day. And so I use this image again to say that, Frank and Lizzie left in 1911, and Frank died the following year, and that was kind of the end of boat building until Stan Lowe and Scott Stroh together. And Stan Lowe was a boat builder, lived out on Siesta Key, and Scott Stroh was a curator at Spanish Point. And they decided they were going to build a Florida Sharpie and kind of construct Frank's old boatyard. So that they did. They made it out of bamboo from the site. They put some tarp on top of it. And this photograph to the right is a great one because it shows the keel being laid. And actually the keel sun. And here you've got Bruce McQuaid in the background, who's still a volunteer at Spanish Point, and John Calhoun in the foreground, who's still a volunteer at Spanish Point. And so it's just amazing to see this. This was back in the 1990s. Here's Stan Lowe working on the boat, putting the first plank on there. You can see the mangroves in the background. Here they're working on it, building this wonderful boat, which would have been like the pickup truck of Florida back, at the turn of the century. Everybody would have had one of these. Here they're getting her ready to launch. And then once she was launched, we used to do tours with Lizzie G until another idea surfaced. Why don't they build a new Magic? So Tim Siebert, who was one of the Sarasota School of Architecture architects, took 5 old photographs of the Magic and drew the lines of it, made the model that you see on the upper left, and then they started building the boat right there in the boatyard. Now, the boatyard had come a little bit further. Pat Ball had helped to actually build a boatyard shed there, and they had engaged Roger Allen, who was a well-known historic boat fanatic, to come and help build Magic. And here you got a photo of Roger here smiling because they've got most of the planking done. And then Nancy Paul, who was our horticulturist then and still is a horticulturist for us. And Nancy took most of these photographs, except she obviously didn't take this one because she's in it. And then here you see Magic getting ready to be launched and before the cabin top was put on. And then here you see Magic as she sets sail, if you will. And of course, we use this to provide tours just around Sarasota. This is not the set sail with Selby boat. That's a much larger vessel. But Magic provides a great opportunity for people to get out and see the Spanish Point campus from a different perspective and also learn a little bit more about the ecology of the area. Kind of makes me think about this photograph down on the right in terms of these young people out in this boat as if it was like their first car, And with a little boat like this, you could go to the beach, you could go to the bay, you could go visit your friends. This is how you got around. I think there's a lot to be learned from this boatyard. These are some photographs I took last week. A little boat just like the one in that photograph that the guys are fixing up. This one took a little damage in the hurricane. And the boatyard is a place where boaty things are hung on the wall, and it's just very boaty. And, there used to be wooden boat shops all over the coast of Florida for many, many years, and there aren't any anymore. This is one of the only places that you're going to find in Florida where people are still building and maintaining old Florida traditional sailboats and other boats made out of wood. And it's just a cool little place. People really like it. And here's a couple of photographs from Tuesday, working on the latest project. And these are highly skilled volunteers, like many of our volunteers at Marie Selby Botanical Gardens. And they take care of Magic. They make sure everything's running good. And they provide education down at the boatyard for the people that come down that way. So again, this connection between the water and the land through the boats and the Guptill House and Guptill's influence and the Webb family is really a tremendous learning opportunity for our community. And these photographs I love. This one on the left is Mabel Webb and her dog out in Slim, which was her little sailboat. And this is just offshore White Cottage. So if you look out there, it's obviously low tide. You can see the shoal, the same shoal we've been seeing the last week or so with the super low tides and Casey Key in the background. And then this boat, the Veruki here with friends aboard out for a picnic on the beach, maybe even a swim. If you look, that guy's actually wearing a swimsuit. And so when we think about the Guptill House, we shouldn't just think about an old house that's been restored. We should think about the Guptill House as being a center for all sorts of things. And when I think about it as a learning opportunity for sustainability. You know, these people live here without electricity, without air conditioning, and they lived comfortably. It shows resilience and it speaks to family. I mean, after all, it was part of the original family homestead and then carved out and given to Lizzie and then shared with all the people that came to the resort. It was a place of entertainment, a place of celebration, a place of hospitality, as it still is today. And it's a place of entrepreneurship. When you think about, they were renting rooms as part of the resort, they had their little kitchen garden, they had the boatyard, they're building boats, repairing boats, sailing boats. So transportation is so important in commerce. And so these are all things that can be learned by young people and adults as they come to visit the property and kind of benefit from all the work that's been done over the years so that a beautiful site like this can be shared with the community and teach us more about how to live along the west coast of Florida. So with that, um, we've just got a couple of minutes, but Amanda, if we have a couple more questions that we want to get into, we have a few minutes to do that.
Yeah. Were there other early boat builders in the area?
So there were very few in the earliest time. When Frank arrived, there's only one other that I can think of, and that was a gentleman named Chandler Yonge. He spelled his name Yonge, and he was up at where the Landing subdivision is now, which interestingly enough became the Honore Palmer estate. And he was building boats there in the 1860s. By the time Guptill started building boats, Chandler Yonge probably wasn't building that many boats. And then when you got into the turn of the century, 1890s and beyond, there were a handful of shipbuilders in the Sarasota downtown area. But Guptill was very prominent. Osprey was known for its shipbuilding, and that was all because of Guptill's boatyard.
All right, and then just one more. Where did Frank learn to build boats?
Oh, this is fascinating because I've thought and always had the impression that he learned to build boats in Maine, you know, but he certainly saw boats being built. He was certainly exposed to the boat building culture there. There were boats being built all around him, but it seems more like he and Will Webb kind of self-taught how to build the boats. And he started with the Florence, and again, a little bit of the correspondence from the family indicates we're not really sure how this is going to work out, but it worked out delightfully. And then he built the 10-ton schooner Vision with William Webb, one of John Webb's sons, and then just kept going from there. To build a 10-ton schooner when you never built one before, that's kind of amazing. But I think his skills developed. Again, one of the granddaughters of the Webb said that, you know, he came with a saw, an axe, and a pocket knife, and that's what he used to do it. So that's not a lot, but it was just enough. Build the house, build the stuff, and of course, over time, he would have acquired more tools. Anyway, yeah.
All right,
Anything else, Amanda?
I think that's all the time we have for today.
Okay. All right. Well, listen, folks, we're going to do this again next month. We're going to do it on the third Wednesday at noon, and it's going to be Treasures of the Historic Spanish Point campus. We're going to talk about the packing house and the chapel, both of which are reproductions of historic structures. And so it's going to be a little different, but that's going to be our topic next month. And I look forward to seeing you. And thanks again for being with us today. And thank you, Amanda, for taking care of everything behind the scenes.
Yeah, thank you.